Welcome to episode 2 of Bragging Rights, the first podcast dedicated to Warhammer Fantasy Battle Reports. This week I played against Josh Sanders, playing his 2,000 point Chaos list. As usual, we were aiming for a tournament style game, so we brought all comers lists, not quite over the top, no special characters, and we avoided the nastiest of the nasty item combinations. We also had the requirement of having a cohesively painted and based army for each of us, so we were a little bit limited in our model selection because of that. So first off, I'll talk a little bit about Josh. What's your history in the hobby?
I started playing Warhammer back in 1995 when I was a freshman in college. I went to school in New Hampshire, and there was a local place, the Wizard's Tower, and at the time I was playing Magic and saw Warhammer, immediately fell in love with it, and sold all of my Magic cards to the store and got a huge starter set of Space Wolves for $40K. And played for 2 or 3 years while I was in college, came back to Maine afterwards, and at that point couldn't find a game anywhere, and amidst a half dozen times moving in my early and mid-20s, I just lost my entire army of Space Wolves, just 3,000 points, which was a lot in second edition, just lost in the shuffle.
Wow.
Yeah, it sucks. Thinking about it now, there was a lot of really cool models, and it was 100% painted and everything. So go back a couple of years, tail end of 4th edition, bought some orcs, started painting them. Some friends of mine that had played mini games like Warhammer and stuff like that years and years ago liked the looks of the models, so they bought some models, and we started playing games of 4th edition 40K. 5th edition came out, and we saw some people playing fantasy, and I liked the looks of the dragons and the knights more than I did the tanks and the guns, so got into fantasy, bought my Warriors of Chaos army book, started buying the models. This was about a year ago. I've been playing fantasy for about a year, and pretty much spent the last year just painting up the army, somewhere around 3,500 points, plus some new additions to play 8th edition better, more Marauders, more Warriors, just bigger blocks, you know. And in the year, while I've been painting the Warriors of Chaos, I've also collected untold thousands of pounds worth of unpainted plastic. I've got Dark Elves probably numbering in the 3,000 points all on the sprue, and Orcs and Goblins army, which is all goblins, also new on the sprue. And I just started building a Ogre Kingdom army. I did up a 1,500 point list, and I've got that built, and I'm just starting to paint it now. Looking forward to playing the Ogres.
Cool. I've got my Ogres on the way too, although the Ogres were really easy to put together and really easy to paint because it was pretty fun. But I have something like 70 Noblars to paint now, and that's not as fun at all.
Yeah, I built 50 of the Noblars, and you know, if I hadn't built the Noblars, the 1,500 point list would have probably been, I don't know, 18 models.
Well,
it tripled the model count, and yeah, I can't wait to start painting those.
I'm using Wargames Factory's Ancient Light Numidians as my Noblars, so it takes a lot longer to assemble. I really like the models a lot. There's a lot of options, but one thing that can be said negatively about them is it takes a long time to assemble them. Separate arms for each arm, separate heads, and each weapon has to be put into the hands kind of Lego Man style. None of them come with weapons already in hand, whereas the Noblars are already, you just put a head on them and then you're completely done.
Head and they're done. And yeah, seeing Matt's Ogre Kingdom army, yeah, I love the theme. It's very, very cool.
Well, thanks. I'm hoping to get it into a battle report sometime soon. Maybe in the next one I'll have it. Alright, well today we both brought 2,000 point lists, and like I said, they're all comers lists, so we didn't tailor them to each other. It's something we'd bring to a tournament, and it's also something that we would expect would comp, you know, somewhere decent, not too low and not too high. We rolled up for a scenario, Battle for the Pass, I believe it's called. It's the lengthways scenario, where you set up your deployment zone as a 24-inch zone on the short edge, which is really, it's a lot different as far as what I'm used to. really hard to imagine when you're deploying how you can possibly outflank someone.
Yeah, you're working with 4 total feet worth of table width instead of 6 feet, so it really limits the amount of maneuverability you get.
Yeah, it's like 300, the movie.
Yeah.
Like, trying to outmaneuver someone when there's no flanks at all. So, why don't you talk a little bit about your list, Josh?
All right, you're looking at the entire army here for my Warriors of Chaos. In the bottom left-hand corner, I have my Lord, who's a level 4 sorcerer. I give him the Lore of Shadow. Love the Lore of Shadow in 8th edition. The spells just really complement my army. All of the debuffs, removing strength, removing toughness, those things make me wound more often. It also makes my opponents wound me less. The signature spell, Miasma, which I like to call Meow Mix, is just awesome because there's nothing better than lowering somebody's initiative when they're actually faster than you, lowering their weapon skill so you're hitting them easier, or if your opponent throws down a really shooty list and you can reduce a unit's ballistic skill by up to 3, and that makes them hit on 6s, 7s sometimes. And if you don't want them to get a charge off, you can reduce their movement by up to 3 inches. So signature spell is usable against pretty much any unit in the game, I think. And Miasma also combos great with Pit of Shades, since it's an initiative-based test or remove the model. And even if you're up against a high initiative army, you've got a initiative debuff, so you can get them down to a 2 or a 3. So you're still looking at 50 to 65-ish% losses. So I think it's a great lore. He had the Blood of Zench, so I can re-roll 1 casting dice every phase, which is kind of nice if I'm trying to string out my phase some. I can throw 2, 3 dice at a spell, and looking for a 10 or a 12, know that I should hit that, and even if I do happen to roll a fistful of 2s, I can re-roll one of those 2s and hopefully get something a little bit better. And also, if I'm going for Irresistible on 6 dice and I get 1 6 and not the second one, I can throw anything besides a 1, hoping to get that second 6, which is kind of nice. Dispel Scroll, just to get rid of something nasty that somebody tries to chuck a fistful of dice at that doesn't get Irresistible Force. And Armor of Destiny, I'm a Chaos Sorcerer, I can wear heavy armor, so what's not to like about a 5+4+. In the center, we've got my BSB. He's based on last year's Games Day model. His one arm that was holding an axe pointing out, chopped off at an Ogre Kingdom's banner because it's a nice, big, impressive banner. Tried to freehand the 4 chaos symbols. Looked like I'd done it with crayons. Actually, it looked like my 5-year-old cousin did it with crayons. It was really bad. So I just opted to cut out the 4 symbols of chaos from the Chaos Space Marine vehicle sprue, glued them on, and decided that I was also going to try and paint yellow for the first time. This was the last model that I painted for my Chaos Warriors. And I figured, you know, the Battle Standard Bearer in a Chaos Army's got to be one badass dude, so nobody's going to mess with him if he's wearing yellow armor. So I like that.
Is he unmarked?
He's a Mark of Zench to help combo with the Talisman of Preservation to give him a 3+ ward, and that helps keep him alive. And in 8th edition, you really want your BSB to stay alive, so ignoring 2/3 of all wounds is pretty handy. Favor of the Gods, in case he happens to get lucky and, you know, kill another hero in a challenge, and it's a 5-point upgrade, and I happen to have 5 points left. Gave him a shield, and he had the Stream of Corruption, which is a great little surprise in challenges. You know, getting an average of 7 strength 3 wounds on an individual in a challenge really helps you get your combat res up in the challenge, maximum overkill, hopefully.
And they're armor piercing.
So -1 to your armor saves. And on the right, you've got my level 2 caster, Mark of Zench. He is a Games Day model from a couple of years ago, and he's pinned onto a Screamer, just to look a little bit different than everybody else's discs. He's got the Puppet for maximum carnage and also saving me from the worst of my miscasts. Charm Shield, a lot of times I'll use him to go after war machines, and that first cannonball that happens to go right through you on a 2 through 6, you can ignore that hit, which is kind of handy. And Blood Curdling Roar, because that also works really well with the high toughness of war machines, you know, wounding anything on a 6. So those are the heroes. I've got 12 warriors of Nurgle, full command, shields, and they have a war banner. And the other warriors are 12 of Zench, and they also have full command shields, and I gave them the blasted standard. I like these two units because they're very fighty, they're heavily armored, so they're very survivable in combat, but both of them also have an advantage against range shooting. The Nurgle mark will give you a -1 to your ballistic skill, so people, especially at long range, are usually going to be hitting you on 6s, 5s maybe. And the Zench guys, with a blasted standard, giving them a 5-up ward in the shooting phase, comboed with the mark of Zench, gives them a 4+ ward, so they get their armor save and then a 50-50 chance of ignoring anything that happens to get through.
And you followed Cheap Man's assembly here, which I like. You've got half the unit in each of these units armed with hand weapon and shield, and the other half is armed with halberds. Well, not really halberds. It's the lances out of the knight kit.
From the knight kit, which make great halberds, and yeah,
definitely.
I sometimes like to run with them with halberds if I have the points. I typically just have hand weapons and shields though, but I like the look of a unit marching into combat, and the guys aren't all armed with the same thing. It looks more like individual warriors. Some guys are going to prefer sword and board. Some guys are going to like having that halberd. I've actually got 12 more Warriors of Chaos that are in the painting stage right now, 6 more for each unit to give them a solid 18. And I modeled all of them with 2 hand weapons. So I've now got the 3 choices that you can use besides great weapons, and they'll be all throughout the unit, making it look like a bunch of individuals marching to war. The Marauders in the upper left-hand corner are Sword and Board, Mark of Zench, full command, light armor and shields, 5-up armor save, 5-up parry. I would have had them with great weapons and Mark of Corn, but all of my great weapon Marauders are unpainted, so I just opted for these guys. In my army, they're the cheap static combat res generator, and they do a pretty good job of that at 6 points apiece. In the upper right-hand corner, we've got 5 knights. They have the Mark of Nurgle, a musician, a standard bearer, and they have the Mark of Rage. They've actually got a little corn symbol painted on the banner. I typically run them in this exact configuration. It's about 300 points, but they hit like a freight train. And then my Hell Cannon, which is my rare, and just absolutely love the model. Took a ton of time to build and paint, but it performs so well with no partials now. Direct hit, you're hitting 21, 20 mils, and on a 25 mil, I think you're hitting like 11 or 12, and you just decimate units. And it's got the nice bonus that anything that's touched by the template, even if you don't wound, has to take a panic test at -1. So selectively placing it, you can actually sometimes clip 2, maybe 3 units and force a bunch of panic tests, even though you don't really put many wounds on things. And against a lower leadership army like orcs and goblins, panic tests can sometimes be a lot better than wounds.
Yeah, I haven't seen a Chaos army run without this yet, to tell you the truth. Even in our small 1,000-point games, I have not found one person who hasn't run it. It is awesome. Everything about this screams, put me in the army. It's priced well, it's survivable, and it also does a whole lot of damage.
And based on the new Monsters and Handlers rule, anytime you're rolling to wound the Hell Cannon, you're rolling against a toughness of 6, so you're not going to get many wounds through. And then once the wound actually gets through, on a 5 or 6, you can allocate that wound to one of the handlers, and the handlers, in this case, just kind of end up being a 5+ ward.
Yeah, I was going to say, lately we've been calling it the handler ward save, because essentially that's all it is. Once those handlers, once all 3 are gone, something happens, but until then, you're unaffected, and if you've lost all 3 handlers, the machine's about to die anyway.
Yeah, and the monstrous reaction chart that you have to do when you lose all 3 handlers is kind of odd with the Hell Cannon. I'm really not sure how it interacts, because the Hell Cannon has to take a leadership test at the beginning of every phase, and if you've lost the handlers, you're testing on a 4, and if you don't hit that 4 leadership, then it automatically rampages 3d6, and each of the monstrous reaction chart results causes you to automatically do that anyway. I think one of them does that. One of them says you stay in place, but you'll spin towards the nearest unit and shoot at it if you have a shooting attack. So I'm not really sure what happens when the Hell Cannon loses its handlers, if it just keeps taking the rampage test, or if it stays with the monstrous reaction chart, because they just don't seem to mesh quite well. They contradict each other.
I'm not sure. The